This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. There is no original date given for this interview. The interview was conducted by Mrs. Mary B. Roberts. The interviewee is Dr. Clarence Isaiah Pontius, that's capital Pontious, of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Dr. Pontius is a former president of Tulsa University. This material is being re-recorded on the 30th of October, 1986 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
May I ask your name, please, your place of birth, and when did Oklahoma inherit you?
I'm Clarence I. Pontius. I was born in Chicora, Pennsylvania in 1892. I came to Oklahoma in 1930, and in 1935, a committee consisting of Mr. Lieb, Dr. Gardner, and shut that off. And Mr. Nelson Moody waited on me and asked me to become president of the University of Tulsa. After considerable thought and talking with Mrs. Pontius, who was raised on the campus of Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio, I decided in the negative, and so indicated by a written letter, or by letter. They again waited on me, and after discussing the matter in greater detail, I finally decided, after talking with Mrs. Pontius, that I would go to the university for 5 years, at which time I thought we'd probably have them into a little bit deeper water than they were at the time they invited me out there. If the Lord had only told me the situation that existed then, I don't think they'd have been there. But anyway, it was a great challenge, and we went to work, and after now it's almost 36 years, and the growth of the institution, in every respect, is most gratifying.
How much was there of the university at the time, and what were some of the challenges that you did meet when you first walked on that campus?
Well, when I walked on the campus, and that might be interesting, a historical fact, I went out July the 1st, was there at 8 o'clock in the morning, went into old Robertson Hall, since torn down, and I saw a young man, and I said, where is the keys to this office back here in the rear of the hallway? And he said, I am Dr. Follows, the registrar. And I said, I'm C.I. Pontius, the new president. I'd like to get in my office. And of course, he produced a key, and so we went to work. At that time, I think they had probably 415 students, and a budget, an endowment of about 615,000, ragtag and bobtail, consisting of 73 farms, numerous city lots, and dilapidated structures, which we had to, of course, liquidate. But having been raised in Pennsylvania and being familiar with the oil industry, I said, we'll dispose of these farms, but we'll keep as much of the mineral as possible, all or 3/4 or half. The result was, plus a gift of some mineral rights, that we ended up with 73 pieces of mineral rights running from 5 acres to 750 acres. We carried on the books at $73, $1 per parcel. And they struck oil, of course, down at Ada, and one lease that we sold to Sinclair became very productive and brought in many hundreds of thousands of dollars to the university. And of course, we eventually liquidated all the stuff that wasn't productive. And when I left the university in 1958, we had about 16 millions of endowment. And of course, in the interval, it's now between 40 and 50 million dollars, and is the largest endowment of any privately endowed university in the Southwest, with the exception of Rice.
I judge then that your mission at the university was, first of all, then as a good businessman. You certainly deserve lots of credit for having put it on the list of the, not only in the black, but it is known everywhere as one of the best endowed schools. We've heard that of it a long time. What are some of your other outside interests other than the university? I happen to know that you're engaged in, were engaged, are now, in other business affairs.
Well, I've always considered myself a business executive as well as an educator, and I was active in religious and civic organizations statewide, and to a degree continue to be, but when you pass the almost a fourscore years, you ease up in some of those things and take a much deserved rest. But I had some wonderful experiences. For example, I was the first man that ever got a sizable gift from Mr. John Mabie. In fact, I had an experience with him that university presidents dream of and few realize. To wit, the phone rang one day, and he asked me if I could be, how soon I could be in the office, for the university is about 3 miles from the heart of the city. And I was across the alley in the Tulsa Club. I said I could be there in 5 minutes necessary, and he said, chuckled, and he said, well, come over, I want to see you. Of course, I've been cultivating John for a number of years, and I walked into his office. He had his tax attorney with him, and he said, Mr. President, what do you need on the campus? I said, dormitories. He said, what's your second need? I said, the business administration building. The third need, student activities building. What did those dormitories cost? I said, $1 million to start with. It never pays to be modest as a university president when you're talking to a man of wealth. He says, are you sure that's what you want? And I said, yes. And he said, kind of philosophized, he said, I want to honor my partner, as he called it. And I said, that's your wife? And he said, yes. I said, what's her name? Lottie Jane. I said, let's build the Lottie Jane Hall for women and the John E. Mabie Hall for men. He said, could we do that? And I said, yes, sir. You sure that's what you want? Yes, sir. All right, I'll give it to you. And in 15 minutes, I was out with that money.
I should say that is every president's dream, but that was unusual. I notice here that you also are a member of a good many other organizations other than educational. I'm sure you must have been a business major. I'm sure of that. But I'd like to know how you managed all of these other directorships and presidencies and so forth.
Well, the answer to that is that 7 weeks or 7 nights in a week were not sufficient.
No.
When I couldn't go, Mrs. Pontius would fill in. And I could make 2 meetings very nicely in an evening, and even 3, but that 3 rushed me. And I decided that life was too short for that. Another interesting incident, I think both these men now deceased, was Mr. R.C. Sharp. I'd long dreamed of having a beautiful, an architectural gem, chapel on the campus to focus the entire religious and philosophy centers in that building. And I told Mr. Sharp about this as we met from time to time, I don't know why, but it happened many times. He was in my box watching football games. And I related to him the vision that I had and the objective of finding someone that would really give us the type of building I was visualizing. I said I wanted a pipe organ and not an electric squealer. And one day he called me up and he said, we've been talking that over. He said, I'm going to give you that money. And he started with $200,000. We built the chapel at about $500,000, and then he endowed it with another $500,000. So all in all, we did very well.
I'd like to have you on my side just before I go to poorhouse. You know, we taught in the days when, well, let's see, in Claremore, my salary was $80 a month. And I taught 5 classes in history and coached the junior play and so forth. But this is about you, not about me. By the way, Dr. Pontius, you gave the commencement address at Claremore the year that my little daughter graduated. Yes. I was just thinking as you spoke then, and I remember you very well on the platform. She is now in California and director of this oral history work in Berkeley, in the University of California. You never know what's going to happen even to the honoriest looking little brat that's in these graduating classes. Tell us something about your connection with, we have several things here that you have listed, some 8 or 10. Why don't you take your pick and give me the gist of those.
Well, Mrs. Roberts, referring to her experience as a teacher at Claremore, the salaries they paid in those days, the first thing I asked for, of course, as a business executive when I arrived in the university campus was their budget. And I was astounded. I couldn't believe that people would graduate undergraduate in a university and then go 3 years or 4 to get an advanced degree. And the salaries we were paying, of course, I realized we were coming out of a depression. The deans were getting $3,000, and I remember one fine doctor of philosophy man in psychology and philosophy, married with one child and another one en route, and I looked at his salary and it was $1,400. Now we have those salaries up where we're paying professors and deans from $20,000 to $40,000, so there's quite a difference. Now, Ms. Roberts has asked me to talk about some of these other things. Of course, I was very active in the Chamber of Commerce, past president of the Rotary Club downtown when they had only the one Rotary Club in the city. And I was very active in the church. At that time, I was a Methodist, and I always think of this experience of satisfaction as chairman of the Finance Committee. I went to New Orleans. Their bond issue was in default, the total of about $500,000. And the trust company in New Orleans had failed and had been taken over by the RFC. And I dealt with them. To make a long story short, I settled that bond issue. It was owned 90% by the bank, so individuals were not hurt. Any widows that had bonds were paid 100 cents plus interest. But we came back and raised $125,000 and burned the mortgage. Then I didn't get along too well with the Methodist bishop, so I left the Methodist church after 50 years and went over to the Hearst Presbyterian, and that's before his time. And Selectman was the bishop then. And yeah, that's right, former president of SMU, he's deceased. And the first thing I knew, they had me on the Board of Deacons and chairman of the Finance Committee. And I said, positively not. I got a church in Ohio out of debt, and this one, and and this university out of debt, and if I ever get to heaven, I know St. Peter's going to ask me to to head up some kind of financial organization. I'm taking a rest. I just refuse to serve, but I will serve as an elder. And
you'll probably find a mortgage on the Golden Stairs.
absolutely. And as an elder, of course, I served my time, and as you know, in the Presbyterian faith, you're ordained with laying on of hands. Once an elder, always an elder. But it was a delightful experience. Of course, I taught many Sunday school classes. In fact, I filled so many pulpits, I said I might as well get my license so that I can do some marrying and make some fees out of it.
Could you tell us something about some of your experiences? Being a school person myself, I know that you must have had problems with faculty, especially as the Depression ended and the war came on, and then teachers got scarce. And I'm sure that you've had both problems and some very gratifying work done with faculty there.
Well, as regard that particular situation, of course, we were all in the same boat, figuratively speaking. All universities and colleges were having trouble keeping their faculties. And in addition to that, of course, our young men were leaving us, cutting down our enrollments. And I have noticed one thing that the years have brought on, that the universities in those days and colleges had faculties that were very loyal. They're dedicated. And I'm afraid today that they've gotten the new idea of success, which is measured by the dollar mark too much. And anyway, we weathered those storms and came out of it in fine condition. You see, we were the only university, University of Tulsa, College of Petroleum Sciences and Engineering, selected by the government to train Army petroleum technicians. That was some experience. I talked to Washington sometimes for hours at a time, and if I told them that we could train these men, they said time was the essence. In other words, all gasoline, all oils had to be analyzed. For if you sent a boy up with the wrong kind of gas in his plane, he was a sitting duck. And they said, can't you shorten the time? I said, well, certainly we can if you'll give us petroleum technicians and engineers. Why, we probably can shorten the time down. So in conjunction with the Ethel Corporation, we trained these Army engineers for the war effort. And then, of course, the next thing that the universities and colleges had to experience was the return of the GIs. Everybody was concerned that they would be quite a burden on the university. Well, they're the finest group of men that, in my 36 years with the university, that I've ever been associated with. They were serious. They didn't care for social life. They were back here with their families. They wanted to get their degrees and get out and produce. But all in all, it was a great experience.
We'd like very much to know something about Mrs. Pontius. You've mentioned her a time or two. We'd like to know where you met her and how you managed to make her Miss Pontius.
Well, now that's a very delightful subject, and I enjoy talking about that. I met her in Warren, Ohio, where I was then living with my family, when she came to visit her cousin, Mr. and Mrs. John Bell. Mrs. Pontius's father, Dr. T. Bruce Birch, was the head of the Department of Philosophy and Psychology at Wittenberg University, the largest Lutheran university in the nation. And incidentally, he, she was very familiar with campus life. I know when I said to her, I guess I'm going to the university if you approve, for 5 years, when the committee had waited on me, she said, well, you couldn't get along with the faculty. I said, well, what do you mean? Well, she said, you're too abrupt. You're a businessman, and they're not accustomed to that. Well, I said, honey, I've always gotten along with people, including you, and I believe I can do this out there. Anyway, we went out, and I couldn't have done and made the success of the university that we have without her help. She was marvelous. The students loved her, admired her, and the faculty. She refused, for example, in the women's faculty club to take an office, but she says, I'll help you. And as one faculty member said to me, or several, that conditions changed so after you and Mrs. Pontius left that the warmth and the sympathetic understanding seemed to go with you, which was tragic. But she, as I say, has been a tremendous help to me all through the years. And I know I said one time, there's one thing that I will not do, and I'm not going to balance a teacup on my knee, a typical businessman like. She says, that goes with the job, you'd better learn to do it. Does that give you what you want?
That was it. The teacup part is getting more and more important, I'm afraid. We expect so much of our public officials now, and both university and civic, that it seems so much of it is transacted on a semi-social basis that the teacup, I guess, does play an important part. Is there something else, some other story that you could tell us about early Tulsa days in the university? I don't think we have very much on Tulsa University in our tapes. We were going to have Mr. John Rogers, but he's ill. And we'd like so much to get some of the real personal happenings.
Well, of course, to review just a bit of the early history of the university during our administration, Mr. Wade Phillips made a challenge gift in 1935, which he cited 3 conditions. One, they had to reduce a trustee board in numbers from 42 or 4, I've forgotten exact, to a working board. And secondly, they had to get a business executive for chairman of the board of trustees and president of the university. And third, as he put it, they have to quit passing the cup, making up deficits. Those are the 3 conditions that I went to under which I went to the university. We reduced the board of trustees from 42 or 4 down to 10, and 10 a working board. And we met monthly, except in July and August, like a bank board. And we reviewed things, and as I told them the first year, I said, I didn't make this budget. I can't guarantee you anything, but I believe after this we can balance the budget, and we did after the first year. But we had our ups and downs, of course, like all universities and colleges do have, because as the university grew, the expenses increased accordingly. But we thawed out the endowment, and we won the confidence and respect of the citizens of the community. Well, for example, I started right in cultivating the bar association. I don't mean the brass bar. I'm talking about the lawyers, over 700. I appeared before them twice a year religiously and sent out over 700 letters each year on nice engraved letterhead, and a few terse paragraphs, the growth of the university, the improvements made in the university, and one paragraph where the relationship between client one who is disposing of their estate to remember the University of Tulsa, for this is the way the great endowments of the Eastern universities have been created. And every letter was personally addressed and personally signed by me. And I kept that up for some 6 or 8 years, and I think the old biblical adage now that one shall sow and another shall reap. And while I did a little reaping the latter part of my term, there's been much of it since then. It's coming in now in great shape. Of course, the largest gift we've received so far is $30 million, but that's a nice gift. So you ask about what conditions were in those early days. Well, frankly, I couldn't believe it. When I went over the campus and saw the condition of the buildings, they hadn't been painted, I guess, since they were erected. And they were far from being desirable. Well, anyway, we went to work, and we got rid of that old dirty Presbyterian brown, I called it, and used, which I think is just as bad, penitentiary gray, for one coat would cover. And we used that in those early years and got things freshened up. And let's see, they had 5, 6, 7 buildings when I went out there, and we put up 28 buildings while I was there. And they've been added 2 since then. But the fine support of the citizens downtown and the fact that we worked early and late paid great dividends. We had faith, and the Lord knows that we walked by faith and not by sight in those early days.
Well, you told me you had an engagement. How much longer can I keep you? Is it? One thing that I remember the talk that you made to the class, because my daughter was in the class, and I took notes on it in order to put it in her book. So it's fresh in my mind. And I remember that one story that you told. I wonder if you remember it. You told them that as you came in at the auditorium, you noticed that on the side of the door, the brass door there, the plate, it said push. And you came on in and you said that now young folks, when you go out, that's what you're supposed to do. Just read that motto on the door. And when it went out, it said pull. You told that as one of the goals for the young people and the way they could attain them. You told that story of a class that had gone in and out that way. And I remember laughing about it and oftentimes referring to it in my classes, that it's going to take a little more push. You're on the wrong side of the door. Dr. Pontius says you got to read it push, not pull, because that's not going to get you anywhere. I just remember, I don't know whether you used that story again or whether it's one of your old ones or not. But it was the first time that I had heard it, and having made notes for my little daughter's annual book, as her senior year, I got that story in it. And when I connected you a while ago with the speaker, well, then the story came back to me. I wonder, would you like to tell us something about your family?
Well, as a family, we have a son and a daughter, Clarence Birch, who was for 12 years in Charleston, South Carolina, and a year ago last October, he and his wife, their 2 daughters, and their son moved to Tulsa, which makes it very pleasant for us in our afternoon, even time of life. Our daughter, Betty Jane, was married to E.R. Philly. They live in Midland, Texas, and they have 2 girls and a boy. And the second daughter was married last summer, and the first daughter will be married this coming summer. Her husband's over in Vietnam, and the that's about the summation of the family. But I was thinking while Mrs. Roberts was talking to me of an experience that happened just before I went to the university, where a young man came in and he said, "I understand you have counseled with the young men." I said, "Yes, I have. What's on your mind?" Now, I happened to know that he was a graduate in geology from University of Oklahoma. Well, he says, "I have a serious problem." He says, "It's caused me a lot of concern." Now, I said, before I tell this story, I want to say to you people that I believe that I gave that young man just about as sound advice as it's possible to a man to give to another. And I said, "What's your problem?" Well, he said, "I'm trying to decide whether I shall have 1 million or 1 million or 10 millions when I'm 35 years of age." And I said, "Well, son, if I were you, I'd work on the first million and then survey the situation." And in the interval, he's married, and the last time I heard of him or saw him, he was still working on that first $1 million. But now, as Miss Roberts was mentioning, a story that I told when I gave a commencement address when she was at Claremore, and she'd made some notes. There is one thing that all my speaking, whether it's teaching a Sunday school class or advising students, that I've emphasized to young people, particularly when I was advising students when they'd come in. So I said, "Now, I expect you to obey the laws of organized society. If you don't, you're going to end up in the Hoosgaw and the booby hatch." I said, "You can go out here and rush through a red light 2 or 3 times, but just keep it up and see what happens." But I said, "I'm seriously concerned with what you're thinking inside. For as the magnet attracts the steel, so is the individual attracted to the ideal, be it base or noble, that he holds close to his heart. And if you think something that is fine and pure and good and wholesome and successful, you will attain through the years in degree to that pinnacle." You know, after all said and done, these objectives in life that we hold so dear are like lighthouses that we see from afar. Do you ever think when you come up to that lighthouse that you dreamed about, you're looking on into the distance at the lighthouse that's over some distance away? And I've said to them again, I'm concerned that you keep before you as an objective in life the worthwhile things. It'll pay you great dividends.
Did you have any problems with this so-called campus unrest that we have now?
Only in degree. The latter part of the 50s, we were having many institutions panty raids. And see Mr. Robertson laughing here, and this other gentleman.
Did you have any problems with this so-called campus unrest that we have now?
Only in degree. The latter part of the 50s, we were having many institutions panty raids. And see Mr. Robertson laughing here, and this other gentleman. It wasn't serious. It was kind of a lark, and of course, to be perfectly honest, the girls were just as bad as the boys. Yes, they egged them on, as they say. But that is about the most serious thing I had in my administration. The students were loyal and dependable, You see, when I went to the university, they had some local fraternities and two national sororities. And we nationalized all the fraternities and brought many more in to the campus, built the homes for them, the nice houses, and also the same with the sororities. The same with the matter of accreditation. We have every accreditation that's available. But of course, it took years to get that, and upgrade the faculty and make the necessary improvements in the facilities and so forth and so on.
It looks like a lot of red tape sometimes, but it's
Well, I was very active in the North Central Association of colleges and secondary schools. I was on the executive committee. In fact, I fought the battle of Oklahoma A&M when they had having difficulties. Yes, the OCU and the little school of the Ozarks. I could elucidate in great length on that. But anyway, I was paid the compliment when my many offices were ended that they voted me and a membership of 10 to 15,000. They grant usually 1 to 3 honorary life members, and I was made an honorary life member. Another experience that I shall never forget was being a member of the executive committee of the White House Conference on Aging. It took me to Washington sometimes, a couple of times a month. And then I was the recipient of a nice gift from the Association of the Conference of Christians and Jews. They sent me on a nice visit to the Holy Land for a matter of 6 weeks. And I came back, and my secretary said to me one time, "Do you know how many talks you've given?" I said, "No." She said, "You have given 33 talks about your trip to the Holy Land." I took many pictures and bought many slides and never showed them once. They'd say to me, "Have you pictures?" "Yes." "Well, be sure and bring them with you." "Listen," I said, "I've been bored to distraction so many times that if I can't paint you a word picture of what I saw over there and what I thought, then it's a waste of time to have me. There will be no pictures."
Mine are still in the closet.
Yeah, mine are in the closet. I haven't looked at them.
We were there in 1964, and we fixed our slides, and at the time thought perhaps we would use them. But like you say, we decided it was more interesting to tell it and to converse, and so my husband and I kind of made a team, and talking it between ourselves and what we most enjoyed about it. I believe they got much more out of it than they did with the pictures.
Because I've had people say, "So-and-so came here and brought his slides, and we thought he never would end. We'd like to die." My gracious.
Dr. Pontius, the stand in the Berkeley area and in San Francisco State, could you or would you like to prognosticate a little bit and tell us just which way we are going in education?
Well, I think much of this trouble could have been avoided if the administration had not been quite as permissive as it has in the past. And that was demonstrated, of course, out there was at the College of the Pacific, I believe, where President Kaya at Francisco State, when he told them that the administration was running the university, and this is it. And I think we needed more of that. Of course, I shall never understand President Pusey at Harvard, because I knew him fairly well, had been with him at many luncheons, and when he asked a representative of the Black Panthers to speak at his commencement exercises, I'm like Al Capp that was the last. And of course, it did eventually, he resigned. Now, those are the things that there's no excuse from the standpoint of administrators permitting on the campus.
Don't you think perhaps the faculty... All right, now then, let's start again. We were discussing the part of the faculty in this the student unrest that we have on campuses. And I had asked him to prognosticate just a little bit for us and tell us something that might be of help in that.
You know, Mrs. Roberts, you must realize that my middle name is Isaiah, which gives me the right to prophesy, but I very seldom indulge in that right. But since you asked that question, first, of course, in the matter of the selection of a faculty, as faculty members resign or retire, in selection of the new faculty members, great care should be exercised. Even then, you will get some of these off to the right or extreme to the left that will cause you trouble. Now, we can't put all the blame on the administrators because they have certain rules and regulations, like the Association of American Association of College Professors. And this other one, on tenure. Mm-hmm. That tenure business is, well, you know what. Yeah, that's right. You know what former president of Hutchins of Chicago was asked how much authority a university president had. Could he fire a faculty member? And he said, oh, yes. Yes, he said, if he's caught committing rape in a classroom in the presence of two qualified witnesses, I can fire him.
Well, it seems to me, although as a teacher, I remember when I worked very, very hard for tenure, and I thought it was going to be such a benefit to all of us. I thought then we could dismiss our minds about the little politics that played here and there in the schools and could put all of our mind and thought and time with the students and the individual needs of the pupil. But it didn't work out like that on the universities, I'm afraid. It seems to me that once they've had their 3 years, then they feel it's wide open and they can do nothing about it. It seems to me that as an administrator, that you would have to be a splendid psychologist. You're a business major, but it must be too that you must have been a wonderful reader of character and of people.
Well, you notice that I, earlier in this interview, referred to the fact that Mrs. Pontius and I were complimented on our sympathetic understanding and warmth of relationship with the faculty. Now, for example, we did do this, and I like to use the plural rather than the perpendicular pronoun. When I did have some misfits on the faculty, I called them in and tried to reason and talk to them, and if that didn't produce results, then I'd say, now listen, you're not happy here, and we're not happy with you, but you've got a family and responsibilities. Now let's work together to try to relocate you where you will be happy. Mm-hmm. I remember quite well one man, and he was in religion, strange as it may seem, and sociology, but he was a pinko. Mm-hmm. And I talked to him, and it took me a matter of a year and a half, but we got him relocated in the West, and the last report, he was doing a fine job. So consideration must be given to the both sides. But coming back to this matter of tenure, it's just like unionism. I well remember as a boy in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania coal fields and oil fields. Goodness, if they hadn't unionized those miners under Mr. Lewis, it was pitiful the way they were exploited, and they'd shut down the mines and they'd figuratively starve to death. But on the other hand, it grew to the point where the tail was wagging the dog, and that's what we're having to contend with today in many situations.
Of course, it's right. The students say they must be heard, that they haven't had a voice, and they must be heard. Well, I'm for the students being considered. Everything we do is for them, but it seems to me that their manner of demanding attention is one of the basic concepts that they go wrong right at the first on the campus. That demand to be heard would be so much better if it could be done sympathetically between a good counseling faculty person and that individual. They can be heard through one person the same as they can by getting out and tearing the streets up. And it seems to me that we have a few basic things that our faculties and universities are going to have to reevaluate, and I won't say get back on the track because maybe it'll be a new track, but at any rate we're going to have to leave some of the things that we're doing now.
There isn't any question but what your sound and your logic there. Of course, we hear much about academic freedom. Well, there's a lot of difference between freedom and license. Abuse, right. The same way with the student and student life on the campus. Perhaps I'm old-fashioned, but this thing of not wanting any rules or regulations whatsoever, dormitories where young men and women are together all night, I still believe in morality in the home and in the university and in the community and in the nation. And unless it is taught there, if you want to see a parallel to what's happening now, if I want to be a bit pessimistic for a while, just read Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And you'll see that it's running parallel today in our nation. And you can't substitute sophistry for philosophy, nor can you substitute these freedoms, so-called, which have degenerated into licenses for the thing that's needed.
I have a son-in-law, Hillary Fry, her boy from Kingston, Oklahoma, and graduated in Chicago, went to Berkeley. He's been teaching there now. He has his tenure. He's been teaching there now in 12 years or more. But when their little boy, the baby, brought up by the permissive theory and by the book and so on, crawled over one day when I was visiting in their home and began to pound on my shins with an egg beater. Well, I objected slightly and kept holding my hose and trying to protect my legs and thinking surely the father would call him off in a minute, but he just let him beat on, and finally Hillary, out of one side of his mouth, said, "He'll get tired in a minute and just stop." So I took it until the baby crawled on off. A few minutes later, they asked me to put him in his playpen out in the yard. I did, and sitting in the door watching him, when a little child came by and put a skillet he'd been playing in the sand pile with a skillet, and he put this old tin skillet over his head and then began to pound on it with a spoon. Well, of course, my grandson, my little one, was just screaming bloody murder. Hillary came to the door and said, "Well, Mama, are you going to let him just kill a kid?" And I said, "Oh, he'll get tired in a minute and quit."
Well, again, I may be old-fashioned, but in Pennsylvania, where I was raised, we were brought up to the tune of a hickory stick that the little bit of hickory oil will do wonders. And I've observed it both in my own children and my grandchildren, that when that parental discipline falls down, then look out. And anyway, I think that they can talk all they please, but this man Dewey, in my opinion, at Columbia, started the avalanche with his so-called that's right, freedom. But later on, he became conservative. Yes, Thorndike is right. But this thing of saying to a youngster that just letting them do anything they want to till they get tired, and turning them loose in like a cafeteria, letting them browse a little here and there and taste this and that, that's to my way of thinking is ridiculous. We still, it's experimentation. Yes, they learn. Well, they sure do. And society's going to pay the price for that learning too.
Well, my son-in-law now, this boy is older. In fact, he's 17 and entering university this year. And he's really a very delightful young fellow, the boy is. But his father often tells that, about how I straightened him out on one fact in education, that it wasn't applied two ways. Well, Dr. Pontius, do you have something else now you'd like to go on record for? I've enjoyed this talk with you so much. I'm afraid I've talked too much.
I can understand why people engaged in educational work find it very attractive and very soul satisfying, helping young people. For example, my father-in-law, Dr. Birch, he worked 28 years writing his De Sacramento Alteris, which is the finest volume in existence on nominalistic philosophy. And when the average man, for relaxation, would go out and play a game of horseshoes or golf, he'd go up and study, and he would take a heavy magnifying glass, magnify the glosses on these photostats that he had of tomes that the monks had illuminated, as they call it, that he'd gotten from Belgium and Scotland. Of course, he was a member of the Overseas Authors Club, and he had degrees and honors beyond mention. But he had one famous lecture, The Psychology of the Deadline, that he's asked to deliver at Yale and some of the Eastern schools. But he spent his life, he's also an ordained Lutheran minister, but he had a full life and was dedicated to education. And that's the thing I referred to a while ago, that we don't have that dedication. Somehow today in our faculties and our teaching fraternity, they're thinking too much now to the dollar mark. We want more and more and more. That's perfectly, you can't live in this day and age without money. But on the other hand, there are some considerations that's beyond the price of money. You can see what money has done to many of young people that have no responsibilities attached to it. It's tragic. But on the other hand, it's a great power if used for good. As I've told you, gifts that have been made to the university that will continue to bless and humanity in the years way into the future. Just like I told Mr. Sharp that we had a chapel with a nice reception room. Many of our students, lovely young ladies that were going down to the Rose Chapel and to the Kerr Memorial Chapel for their marriages, would be married in the campus. Now you have to figuratively stand in line to get a date.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pontius. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Uh, Having had a little bit of what you've had a whole lot of, I felt like I was on the same wavelength with you. And thank you so much. We appreciate it.